I began my last episode by saying that I'm a foodie, and here is another episode that revolves around food, because this weekend we celebrate a feast which really is about a meal. It's about food. It's about bread and wine, which we Catholics believe is the body and blood of Christ. Now, the history of this feast is very beautiful. See, on Holy Thursday, Jesus celebrated his last meal, the Last Supper, with his disciples. But because Holy Thursday fell within Holy Week, the focus was more on the passion, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. And somehow, Holy Thursday did not get the importance that it deserved. And so, very early in the church, as early as 498 AD, the church celebrated Holy Thursday as Natalis Chalicis, or the birth of the chalice. But because it fell during Holy Week, the church always felt that it was important to take this important event and celebrate it outside of Holy Week. And that's really the beginning of the Feast of Corpus Christi. There was a nun by the name of Sister Juliana of Carolina, and she had a lot of devotion to the Blessed Sacrament. And then through her effort and through a vision that she saw, the church finally came to recognize in 1264 AD, by a decree published by Pope Urban IV, the Feast of Corpus Christi was established on the Thursday after the Feast of the Trinity. But then, of course, it's moved to Sunday because the church gathered together on Sundays more than it on Thursdays. And so now we have the Feast of Corpus Christi on the Sunday after Trinity, which was last Sunday. Now, talking about a meal, this is a very, very important feast. I'm sure in our lives there are times when we gather around a meal to celebrate people. One of the best ways that we do that is around Thanksgiving. I'm sure there has been a dish in the family that has been there for generations, and every time we cook that meal, that particular dish, we remember the person whose recipe it was. So the Feast of Corpus Christi is something like that. We remember the one who asked us to celebrate this festival, this meal, to have this meal together. And this meal, what we celebrate really is presence. See, presence is very important, isn't it? If you have lost somebody that you love very deeply, you understand the importance of presence. Now, the Feast of Corpus Christi is really a celebration of God's presence in our midst. Jesus Christ made it possible for him to be present among us even after his death. Even though humanity treated Jesus Christ brutally, out of his enduring, unfathomable, unconditional, never-ending love for his people, Jesus decided that he would be present to humanity. So this really is a feast of the presence of Christ to humanity. And when we celebrate the feast, we are actually expressing our gratitude to God for being present to us even today. And so may I ask you, tomorrow somehow make it to church, be part of the Eucharist, receive Christ in communion, and show your gratitude to Christ for being present, really present, not in some symbolic way, but in a very real way present to us. Now, we're talking about food, right? You've heard the saying, you are what you eat. And it really is true. What we eat makes who we are. And so this saying could not be more true than when it came to the Feast of Corpus Christi. See, we not only eat the body of Christ, but the church which eats the body of Christ is then indeed called the body of Christ. In other words, we who receive Jesus in communion really become part of who he is. And the practical implication of that is very simple. Listen, folks, once we receive communion And wherever we go, we become living tabernacles. We become the presence of Christ to people. And that's why it's very important that we Catholics who receive the body and blood of Christ then act like Christ. That we indeed remember that we are what we eat. We are the body of Christ. Which also means that we must treat each other with the same reverence that we treat the Blessed Sacrament. So I wish you a happy feast, and as I said, it's all about food. Make sure that you receive the body and blood of Christ and thus become a sacrament of Christ in our world.